Hi everyone, thank you first for having me and inviting me here to speak today. So, again, my name is Loretta Bosing, and I just want to make it very clear, I'm standing here today, I'm not making $1 for being here. I'm going to miss work today, my husband missed work today, it's going to cost us over $1,000 to be here to speak. So, I'm sorry, it's already emotional after that. So, I am the mother of a child whose life relies on medications every 12 hours. So what happened is he got the flu, 2 years old, kids get the flu. His body had an overreaction to the flu, and I think now that we're seeing more of that with COVID, that's happening to more patients unfortunately, and it fought off his kidneys and his liver. His body fought off his kidneys and liver. Days earlier, we had this healthy, blue-eyed, curly-haired boy. He would, out at night, we would take him outside, and he loved to sing like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to the stars and the moon. And all of a sudden, my son would lose his ability to talk. He would lose his ability to walk. He was put on a ventilator. You know, that night that they put him on a ventilator, they're just like, your son, someone told you your son's gonna be put on a ventilator, right? I'm like, no, I didn't realize that my son's life was fading so quickly, but at that moment I really did. And I'll do anything to make sure that I never see him in that condition again. So I'll never forget one day we're walking up to the pediatric intensive care unit, and there's a nurse with a clipboard. She said 80% of your son's liver has failed. In order for him to survive, he will have to have a liver transplant. And that was the moment that she said we would have to agree to give him medications every 12 hours. Of course, you know what, if that's what it takes to save his life, let's do this. So his liver failed so quickly, and I don't know if you've ever seen anyone go through liver failure. I pray that you never do. It's so hard, like I could just feel that we didn't have that much time, and I could just feel like the air just coming out of my lungs. It was hard to even take a deep breath, and I remember his transplant was scheduled to occur that day, and the organ was late getting there, and I asked the transplant surgeon, I said, are we going to make it? And she said that we will never make it if we don't try. So blame her for me being here today, because I know, here I'm talking about issues that may not be easy for you all to hear, and I'm sorry for that, but I'm not here, to upset anybody or to hurt anyone's feelings. I'm here to say, look, there's this problem, and I'm looking to you to help me come up with a solution to resolve it. And if you're not able, I'm okay with that, but help me find the real solution. So my son was listed, and there were 3 livers for the surgeons to choose from. So I just want to let you know, I just want you to think about that for a minute, 3 livers, and hearing that, to know that there's 3 parents that just lost their child, their mind's waiting. We're so thankful to those families and for a good life. And I promise I'll do the best to protect it, as it lives on inside of him. He got his transplant from a 3-year-old little girl. So not long after, we were discharged, about a month and a half. Later, we decided to try mail order pharmacy. His medications arrived on a 102-degree day in only a bag, Liquid World children's transplant medications. And I thought about the outside temperatures, and the bottle was extremely hot, and I'm like, there's no way they wouldn't regulate this. Surely someone's making sure that this is safe. So he would end up back in the hospital. His meds were so low in his bloodstream that the doctors questioned if I was giving his medications. Of course, I'm giving my son his medications. I don't want to go through what we just went through. There was 2 options. We could give him harsher chemo medications, or else he would most certainly lose his transplanted liver. So they had it inserted in mine. For 2 hours, I had to sit there and watch as multiple nurses held my 2-year-old down as he screamed and he cried. And I questioned those medications. I had to have the nurses stop because I couldn't take him crying anymore, and I held him in my arms, and I just kept saying, I'm so sorry, you know. But I promised I would never use mail order unless I could prove that it was safe, and I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have my concerns. So with each episode of rejection, my son, his body has a chance that eventually it's going to figure out how to fight off this transplanted liver. It's not a cure. So 2012 to 2018, those were good years. You know, we got to use the hospital pharmacy. They worked closely with all of my son's physicians. There were no worries of temperature storage or delays. There was nothing back then. And from then 2018 came, and we started receiving the letters that everyone gets, you know, must use mail order pharmacy or you're going to have to pay 100% of the cost. For our family, there's no way we could afford 100% of the cost. So I still kind of blew it off because I'm like, this is America, you know, there's no way that they could do this. I just thought it was a threat. Until one day I was scheduled to have a heart surgery the following week, and I had called in my son's medications earlier that week. We arrived on a Friday to get his medicines, scheduled for surgery that Tuesday. And I was told that it's not covered. And I'm like, how come? What's the rejection letter? Or what's the rejection saying? And they're like, it says this is an inappropriate place to fill your child's medications, so it's not going to be covered. And I argue, still to this day, that that is the most appropriate and safest place for me to get my child's medications. So I felt like I didn't have a choice, and I'm like, okay, I'll give them a try. And they promised me an ice pack. It arrived, you know, on a very hot day again, no protection at all. And so you may have heard that a concerned mom will do more research in the FBI. That's definitely me. I have a lot of information and a lot that I will cover on the way. So I called the manufacturer. They told me to discard my son's medications after they were shipped that way. I would call the mail order pharmacy. They would keep giving me excuses that didn't quite match up. At first, they tried to blame the manufacturer. They tried to blame the FDA. If you read the NBC investigative report that shared my son's stories along with like hundreds of other patients, the FDA would tell me that they don't regulate mail order pharmacy, but they get these complaints in the middle of every summer and every winter because someone's insulin is just sitting in their mailbox. They would blame USP. USP would direct me to 650, General Chapter 659. They state that the medications on the label on the medication bottle, shipping is a subset of storage. And the label that says excursions permitted up to 86 degrees, that applies to shipping. So there were more alarming statements made, such as we can't control UPS, we're just going by guidelines that aren't completely set. You're not the only one, I would keep hearing them say. I made 30 to 40 calls, and I want you to keep this in mind as many of you are Board of Pharmacy members. 30 to 40 calls. Not once did anyone tell me about the State Board of Pharmacy. Not once did they mention you all. I didn't even know State Board of Pharmacy existed to complain to, and I just asked someone in the hall the other day, do you know who you would complain to if you had an issue with your medications? No. Most of the general public doesn't even know you exist. So my son's labs would elevate again. The doctor wrote a pill. The pill was denied. The specialty pharmacy did offer me a few other options. They said they would ship them to the local pharmacy the same way. They could wrap them in extra bubble wrap to protect them from the heat and freezing. Or I could drive 400 miles to get my son's medication safely at the specialty pharmacy that I was being forced to. The FDA would eventually direct me to the State Board of Pharmacy. I'm going to say this, you know, I love my Board of Pharmacy, okay? But they also would encourage me to file a complaint, and then also file a complaint with the Department of Insurance. So the Department of Insurance complaint would end up on the U.S. Department of Labor's desk. They would state that they get calls like mine, and this is also an NBC investigative report. They would get calls like mine in the middle of every, they would get calls like mine frequently. Again, I'm not the only one. And although it's unfair, and although it's unethical, it's not illegal. U.S. Department of Labor suggested that I start a petition and a Twitter. Never had one before. So I reached out to my first news station, and after I filed the complaint with the Board of Pharmacy, I hadn't heard anything back yet, but the reporter states you'll know when I reach out to them, because you're going to get called probably the next day, and sure enough, that's exactly how that happened. So our state does have a rule that states that medication should be handled within the manufacturer's or the USP's guidelines. Well, I know that's not happening, but there would be no justice there. There were no consequences for them shipping that medication inappropriately. I did not feel like I got justice, so here I am, because I know now I'm not the only one. Because see, I started the petition, which by the way, just upon arriving here, now has 200,000 supporters to stop the forcing of mail-order pharmacy. The stories, you can read through them, the comment section are horrifying, that I have to go to bed with every night. I find out that the temperature issue is just one of many issues. And after I'm done today, I will send out an update on the change.org petition and just kind of let them know how I'm feeling about this meeting today. It will go out to all 200,000 of them. Now the stories that I come across again, they're bad. There's also one-star reviews on these reports pages on these pharmacies that were forced to. They're so bad that there's transplant patients like my son that are going days without medications. Children's cancer patients are, their treatments are being interrupted. And I know that many of you already know that. That's not new. And I urge you just to, read those comments and be familiar with them. So I want to know today what would happen to me if I knew that my son's medications would lose potency. What would happen if I put my son's medications in those conditions? What would they do to me? If I didn't give my son's medications to him for days, or even risk that, what kind of parent would that make me? But nothing today happens to these executives. I connected with the UPS petitioner that would let me know that the trucks reach up to 150 to 160 degrees. They're advocating to get the back, not the front of those trucks air conditioned, the back, because drivers are dying entering the backs of those trucks. The NADP's mission is very similar to mine. It has to do with protecting public health. Now, we're not here today to protect PBMs, not the chain pharmacies, mail-order pharmacies, independent pharmacies. I'm here to protect patients like my son. And Al mentioned that, every once in a while things circle around every so often. That's very true. But today, I found some wrongs that we can rewrite, and the boards can step in to help. This was an issue discussed 20 years ago, but nothing happened. There was a study that showed the trucks reach up to 170 degrees. But one lobbying group, I'm going to refrain from saying, did state that the meds, that they didn't actually ship medications in those packages. So, we'll just kind of see what happens, and if this comes up later on as an issue, that maybe we'll reinvestigate it then. So thank you again for taking the time to do that today. Additionally, 20 years ago, there was a Senate hearing, and the state boards across our nation had, the Senate hearing would be about the risk of mail-order pharmacy, and many of the boards wrote to the Senate saying that they're regulated the same way, but no one mentioned that the temperatures are not regulated, that they would be out in these trucks for extended times, that patients' treatments would be interrupted due to delays. Often I hear from boards that patients need to file more complaints, but first of all, we didn't know that this issue even existed. We had to find it out on our own. Most They're not warned that medications lose potency. They can also become toxic, as you can see with much of the NDMA recalls. That increases with heat. And I'm sure that that's just the tip of the iceberg. But we'll never really know just how many lives have been harmed because patients and physicians, they're not warned about the risk. Boards, they know that there's a limit to how high temperatures that medications, they can break down, they can become toxic. And it's best for all of us to ensure that medications are stored properly throughout the supply chain. There's also a limit to how many medications that chain pharmacists can fill in a day. And I just think that once it reaches an astronomical number and you're seeing the cars parked around the building, that you do have a role to protect us. Patients, are rarely discussed in the PDM independent pharmacy issue. And many will say that independents are doing fine, but if I have 10 pharmacies on a block, one owns a CVS and it's the only one that I can use, and the cars are just wrapped around that building, and I can't even access that independent pharmacy to get my son's medications, and that CVS that we're forced to use has over a 20% hit rate, as found here in Oklahoma, and that's the only pharmacy I'm allowed to use, I might as well just live in a pharmacy desert. I get that the boards can't touch the reimbursement issue, but public safety issues, they can, and they must. Maybe once they reach a certain amount of prescriptions, notify the boards, and the boards have some kind of backup plan to save our lives. This temperature issue, I'm sorry I got off track there for a minute, but this temperature issue is a common sense issue. The issue of temperatures, it isn't a political issue, it's not a PDM versus independent issue, it's about patience. It's similar to just like ensuring that our milk is being stored properly during transport to Walmart grocer, or my small town grocer. And most today, when it comes to the temperature issue, they just assume that someone's already doing that, that they wouldn't just leave such a critical issue unregulated. So the boards noted that temperature storage is an issue because I've seen the fines in the brick and mortar stores for temperatures being outside of range and requiring, the destroying of all their medications for even just a couple of days. The FDA knows that temperatures matter because they require proper tracking of temperatures from manufacturers. But I, like so many other patients today, we're losing faith in the regulatory boards that are supposed to protect us. And I don't know if they're capable. I really don't. I don't mean that in a hard way. I just don't know anymore. I want to have hope, and if not, just help me figure this out. I don't really know what the next steps are. Do we need another agency to regulate this? What good today is our healthcare system? The pharmacy, I've learned, is really the backbone of everything in our healthcare system. But what good is all of the money that we put towards diagnosing, all the money that we put towards the treatment plans, if everything literally falls apart at the last mile? And what good is all the work that the FDA and the state boards do in relation to safety of medications if we can't even get them? Because our pharmacies are days behind, or they write harmful. The lack of regulation has slowed innovation in this area. Even in areas where researchers and students, they're learning new information on these issues, but if it doesn't make it here to the boards, what good is it? But it made it here today. It did, and I'm glad to see that. So I've learned a lot that's been alarming. Mail-order pharmacy is just where I started in that issue. So to the pharmacy students, you're my rose petals. Here are the ones I have a lot of hope in. And to the small handful of pharmacists and the board members who I know will say this is an issue we need to get seriously. So corporations today, they're going to try to get you to ignore that same inner gut feeling that I got as you're sipping life-saving medications out that door. They're going to tell you that it should be okay, although you know that you can't determine the exact temperature that medication is going to reach in the back of that truck or in the mailbox. I'm gonna ask you to maybe reconsider. And if you can't, I understand, but please speak out, do whatever you can behind the scenes. You're gonna be taught to overextend yourself to the point you'll doubt your worthiness. I've talked to those pharmacists that's contemplated suicide. That's not pharmacy, guys. It's not the way it's supposed to be. You're going to find it difficult to sleep at night. Because you're worried you made an error. It doesn't have to be this way. I'm here not because, again, I want to cause any problems. I'm here because my son received a gift of life from a 3-year-old little girl. And I vow to protect it. And I vow to now protect all the other patients that I'm here today speaking for. I'm asking the boards today to help ensure that we're moving and we're doing something about these issues. Because we will never make it if we don't try. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta. We'll take a look at the pre-test for a second. Jackson, he's one of our RD, which I think we graduate in December. And he's done a tremendous job on pulling the student group together. They worked on this over a year. And also then Marty will follow up with discussions, questions at the end. We don't have any disclosures of any type. I'd like just to have your feedback on, does your state regulate temperature exposure